Welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Thursday, February 6th, 2025. Nearly 5 years after schools closed, the nation gets a new report card. A student at Longwood Middle School in Middle Island, New York, takes a math test. Almost 5 years have passed since COVID-19 first disrupted America's schools, and new data, known as the nation's report card, offers cause for hope and concern. The good news in math, many students have made up at least some of the academic ground they lost during the pandemic. The bad news, in both reading and math, most 4th and 8th graders in 2024 still performed below pre-pandemic 2019 levels. What's more, while these achievements declines were exacerbated by the pandemic, they appear to have begun even before COVID-19, raising important questions about why students are struggling and what educators and policymakers can do about it. The news arrives as the nation's public schools have largely spent the $190 billion in federal emergency funding they receive from Congress to help pay for, among other things, research-backed interventions, including summer school and tutoring. Previous research suggests that money did lead to modest academic gains, though this new data shows students still have a long way to go. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, which provides data for the nation's report card, is mandated by Congress and is the largest nationally representative test of student learning. NAEP tests were first administered in 1969. Today, the assessments in math and reading are given every 2 years to a broad sample of students in 4th and 8th grades. Students held steady in math or even made ground up. In 4th grade, the average math score tickled up slightly compared with 22, ending a pandemic slide. In fact, white, black, Hispanic, and economically disadvantaged students all showed modest gains, on average. In 4th grade, it seems that regardless of where students were, they were improving, says Lisa Ash, a math consultant with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction and a member of the National Assessment Government Board, which sets NAEP policy. That said, 4th grade math scores still remained below pre-pandemic 2019 levels, with one exception. Alabama was the only state where 4th graders' average math scores surpassed 2019 scores. In 2022, lawmakers there passed a law aimed to improving math proficiency for all K through 5th students in the state. But COVID-19 isn't all to blame. A longer view of 4th graders with math scores and student achievement more broadly, shows those scores began stagnating and even declining before the pandemic. Math scores peaked around 2013. Multiple education researchers tell NPR they aren't sure why. Math scores and their pandemic slides. This is a multi-trillion-dollar question, says Dan Goldhaber, an education researcher at the University of Washington, who has studied the pandemic learning loss. One thing we know is that fourth grade math performance improved. Around the same time, the old federal education law, known as No Child Behind, requirements were phased out, beginning in 2012, and ultimately replaced in 2015. Math performance, especially among lower performers, fell. That's just one possible explanation for the slowdown that the pandemic worsened. Goldhaber suggests learning could also have been set back by the Great Recession, by kids' increased access to smartphones and tablets, or by the ripple effects of a decline in kids reading for fun. Since 2017, fewer and fewer students have reported to NAEP that they enjoyed reading. It's important to understand what caused that earlier stagnation. If we're going to get out of the mire of the pandemic, Goldhaber says. For 8th graders, math scores held steady in 2024 compared with 2022. But as with 4th graders, they remained below pre-pandemic 2019 levels. What's more, the nation's report card highlights some worrying divergence happening within those scores. The highest performing 8th graders improved in math comparing with 2022. But the lowest performing students have moved in opposite direction, losing ground in 2024. That actually caused alarm. Ash says of the widening achievement gap. We need to meet the needs of these students that are in lower percentiles, because something that we're doing is not working for those students. Overall, 39% of 4th graders and 28% of 8th graders scored at or above NAEP standard for proficiency in math. That's a little better than 2022. The NAEP's report warns against comparing these results to state-reported numbers, as the NAEP standard for proficiency represents competency over challenging subject matter, a standard that exceeds most states' standards for proficient or grade level achievement. Reading. The bad news got worse. The results in reading weren't nearly as hopeful as they were in math. 4th graders continued to lose ground in 2024, with reading scores slightly lower on average than they were in 2022, and much lower than they were in 2019. In 2019, 35% of 4th graders scored at or above the testing reading proficiency standard. The figure dropped to 33% in 2022 and further to 31% in 2024. As with math, these declines are entirely the fault of the pandemic. 4th grade reading scores began falling years earlier, around 2015. Only one state, Louisiana, says its 2024 4th grade reading scores surpassed 2019 scores. Reading scores are still dropping. It's worth remembering this current round of 4th graders from the 2023-2024 school year were in kindergarten when the pandemic first closed schools, and many spent some or all of 1st grade learning remotely. 8th graders' 2024 reading scores also dropped. Compared with 2022, with just 30% of students performing at or above NAP's proficient standard. NAEPs classifies students at one of three skill levels: advanced, proficient, or the lowest, basic. According to the results, the share of the 8th grade reading below NAP's basic standard was the largest in the assessment's history. Not only that, but the worst performing readers in 2024 scored lower than our lower performers did 30 years ago for 4th and 8th grade. That's how low these scores historically have dropped, says Peggy Carr, Commissioner for the National Center for Education Statistics. Not one state improved its 8th grade reading scores compared with 2022, let alone 2019. The connection between poverty and performance. This year's NAEP results include a new, more precise index for determining students' socioeconomic status, SES. And the results show in stark detail what teachers and researchers have long understood: that poverty and performance are deeply connected. For example, the overwhelmingly majority, 77% of 4th grade students in the lowest SES category. In the highest SES category, the wealthiest kids performed above the national average in reading. Of the 4th graders in the lowest SES category, though, the results were nearly flipped, with just 34% performing above the national average. The results in math performance were similarly disparate. On a positive note, while many big city districts have made important gains in 4th grade math with their economically disadvantaged students, a handful of districts did exceptionally well, including Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools in North Carolina, Guilford County Schools, also in North Carolina, Baltimore City Public Schools, and the San Diego Unified School District. Missing school is getting in the way of learning. When students took the latest NAEP assessments in early 2024, they were asked how many days they had been absent the previous month. The results were slightly encouraging. A smaller percentage of 4th and 8th graders reported missing 5 or more days of school in the past month compared with 2022. But across the board, lower performing students were more likely to report missing 5 or more days of school in the previous month compared with higher performing students. Simply put, missing school means missing learning. When the students miss 10% or more of the school year, they're considered chronically absent. And as NPR has previously reported, the rates of chronic absenteeism doubled during the pandemic. The link that NAEP shows between missing school and lower academic achievement doesn't surprise Hetty Chang, head of Attendance Works, an organization devoted to fighting chronic absenteeism. It's not just affecting academics. She says of absenteeism, it's affecting social development and executive functioning. To continue on the path of improving attendance and in turn student achievement, Chang suggests that districts look at the students who are missing the most school and the hurdles they're facing. You might not be able to take it all, tackle it all at once, Chang says. You might have to tackle it in bits and pieces, either by barrier or by grade, or by this subset of schools. She says making sure all students are going to school could go a long way in bolstering student activity, student achievement. A guide to what the U.S. Education Department does and doesn't do. Created by Congress in 1979, the department employs more than 4,000 people and has an annual budget of $79 billion. Over and over, President Donald Trump and his colleagues have pointed to the U.S. Education Department as a poster child for government overreach. In fact, Republicans have been calling for the department's dissolution ever since its birth. The effort reached a new level this week as the president began exploring dramatic cuts to programs and staff at the department, including an executive action shuttering programs that are not protected by law and calling on Congress to close the department entirely. Which raises the question, what exactly does the Education Department do? Created by Congress in 1979, the department employs more than 4,000 people and has an annual budget of $79 billion. Many of its responsibilities were given to it by lawmakers. The U.S. Constitution doesn't actually mention a federal role in education. Here's a look at what the Education Department does and doesn't do, and how much of it is protected by acts of Congress. Sending money to U.S. public schools. Most public school funding comes from state and local governments. The federal government, in general, provides only a small fraction of schools' overall funding. Between 6 and 13%, according to a 2018 report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Two of the most important federal funding streams to public schools are Title I, which provides money to help districts that serve lower income communities. In 2023, the Education Department received more than $18 billion for Title I. IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which provides money to help districts serve students with disabilities. In FY 2024, the department received more than $15 billion for IDEA. Both of these funding streams were, like the department itself, created by separate acts of Congress. Title I was signed into law in 1965, and IDEA was signed into law in 1975. They cannot be unwound except by Congress. Large changes to either are unlikely, as the money enjoys broad bipartisan support. The department has no power over what is taught in school. Over the years, Donald Trump has vowed to rid of America's schools of such ideas as wokeness and critical race theory. And he has said that he would close the Education Department in order to return all education and education work and needs back to the states. In reality, it is already up to states to determine what is taught in classrooms. It is not the business of the federal government to be involved in curriculum or personal hiring, says Kenneth Wong, a professor of education policy at Brown University. The Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, which was enacted during the tail end of the Obama years, really clearly laid that out. Wong points Wong points out that ESSA was shaped in part by concerns that its predecessor, No Child Left Behind, NCLB, was teetering into government overreach. When NCLB was reauthorized in the form of ESSA, the law made it clear that it was up to states to determine what was taught in classrooms. Managing college financial aid and federal student loans. The Education Department is not only responsible for managing the federal student loan portfolio, which amounts to approximately $1.6 trillion in student loan debt, it's also responsible for the mechanism that gives students access to college financial aid, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, or FAFSA. More than 17 million current and aspiring college students fill out the FAFSA. And each year, in order to qualify for student loans, grants, and more, for many, it's the only way they can get help paying for college. Students who end up taking out loans become part of the department's massive student loan portfolio, which is managed by the Office of Federal Student Aid, FSA. FSA provides approximately $120.8 billion in grant, work study, and loan funds each year to help students and their families pay for college or career school. According to the office's website, that includes $33 billion in Pell Grants for low-income and middle-income undergraduate students. FSA also oversees student loan services, the outside companies it hires to work directly with borrowers in their loan payments, among other things. Data collection on colleges and college students. The department maintains and collects data from every college, university, and technical and vocational program that participates in the federal student aid program. This allows taxpayers and families the ability to analyze, compare, and track things like student admissions, academic outcomes, graduation rates, need-based aid, eligibility, and more. Tracking student achievements through the nation's report card. The Education Department also oversees the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, or the National Report Card. It is considered the gold standard of student achievement tests in subjects such as reading, math, and science. The assessment, which is mandated by Congress, actually predates the Department of Education. The federal government began administering the test in 1969, a decade before the department was created. The nation's report card has long served as a common yardstick for student achievement and has been an especially valuable tool through and since the pandemic years. In addition to shedding light on how much ground students lost academically, it has also helped the country track chronic absenteeism, poverty levels, and educational experiences of students. The data generated by the NAEP is then used by educators, policymakers, and researchers to work towards improving K-12 education across the country.